Hi everyone, welcome back to Holy Hype. My name is Stav, and as we're working through the book of Mark, we've got 2 chapters left. We're on chapter 15, and it's lining up so that we're going to finish right around Easter, which is perfect timing because today we're going to be talking about what happens after Jesus is arrested. All of his friends have abandoned him. He's alone, and he's facing Pilate and an unjust sentence. So we're going to start with verse 1. We're going to read 1 through 5. I like to just read chunks at a time. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad you're here and joining us on the book of Mark. Please make sure to subscribe if you guys are enjoying these videos and podcasts. I really enjoy making them. Not only does it force me to study the Bible further, but I just find all these cool connections that maybe I didn't see before as I reread these things that I've already read. And that's one thing that's really cool about the Bible. God will reveal things to you in different ways in different times. So we're going to read verses 1 through 5, and then we'll talk about it. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. So in the previous chapter ended with Peter denying Jesus 3 times, just like Jesus said he would. And now Jesus is all alone facing these people who are trying to unjustly have him killed. Of course, this is not a surprise to him. He knows that this is coming, but that doesn't change the fact that he is about to face this tremendous torture and just this horrible death. Even though he's God himself, he's still in human flesh, and he's going to feel every single thing that's about to happen to him. So the reason they're delivering him over to Pilate is because the Jewish people did not have the authority when they were under this Roman rule to actually execute people on their own. They had to do it through the Roman government, and so they're putting it on Pilate. And it's funny because Pilate doesn't understand why they're trying to get rid of this man. Like, he doesn't think that he did anything wrong. He knows that Jesus is innocent. And Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Because that's the accusation that was being made, among other things that they were lying about. And just FYI, we see this account in all of the Gospels. So it's good to go and do a comparison of what each gospel writer wrote down, because they're not all going to write the exact same story the exact same way. If 4 people are writing about an event, they're going to focus on different things. And so you can fill in gaps based on what one person said and maybe something that Mark left out. So it's interesting to read all 4 gospel accounts of the crucifixion and this whole trial. But we're focusing on Mark today. As I mentioned before, I wanted to do Mark on this channel first because it's the shortest of the Gospels. And so, but I do encourage you to go and read this account in all 4 of the Gospels. So Jesus replies, "You have said so." And in Greek, I'm so thankful I know Greek. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for sending me to Greek school as a kid. In Greek, those words are si legis, which means it is as you say. So he's saying it is as you say, Pilate. And the chief priests accused him of many things. So Pilate is kind of baffled. He's saying, "See how many charges they bring against you? Why aren't you trying to defend yourself?" And it says that Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. So Pilate is probably baffled as to what's going on, why this innocent man isn't fighting against all of these false accusations, but Jesus knows what he has to do and why he has to do it. Now we'll read verses 6 through 15. Now at the feast he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him released for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Okay, you know how before I mentioned that like the more you read the Bible, the more you'll see things that maybe you didn't see before? The whole Barabbas thing, I can't tell you how many times I heard this story. I knew that Barabbas was released when Jesus was crucified, but it never hit me until like the past couple years that Barabbas is pretty much representative of all of us as sinners. He is this guilty man. He's a known murderer. He's basically a terrorist who was part of a rebellion against Rome. He killed people. And he is being released, and this innocent man, Jesus, is going to die in his place. Who does that sound like? It's me. And there's this great song called "I Am Barabbas" by Josiah Queen. Love him. And it's basically just Barabbas's point of view. Like, I'm the one who deserved it. Why is this innocent man being taken on that cross? Like, that was my punishment. And that's my punishment. Like, Jesus went to the cross for me. I'm the one who has broken God's law and deserves that punishment. But Jesus died in my place. It's just so amazing, you guys. And another interesting thing is that Barabbas means son of the Father. And I can't remember which gospel it is, but he's actually called Jesus Barabbas. So his name was like Yeshua Barabbas, which means Jesus, son of the Father, because Bar means son of and Abbas means father. So his name was Jesus, son of the Father. He's another Jesus, son of the Father, but he's not the Son of God. It's like one Jesus, who is the Son of the Father, died in the place of the guilty one. It's just so incredible. But something that I want us to know, because as you read this, it seems like Jesus is a victim. And yes, he is. He's a victim of the horrible sin nature of humanity and the evil that is inside the human heart. But I want to read John 10:18 here, because I think this is something that we need to remember as we read the story of Jesus and what happened to him, because it might seem like he's, all of these things are happening to him and people are judging him and crucifying him. But who is in control this whole time? Okay, let's start with verse 17. "This is why the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own. I have the right to lay it down, and I have the right to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father." Jesus is giving up his life willingly. It's not that they're taking it from him, because without his permission and his will, they wouldn't be able to do that. He is doing the will of the Father, and he is in control of what's happening. It's just that it has to happen in order for you and I to be reunited with God and have that communion again. And I was listening to a sermon by John MacArthur on this chapter, and he was talking about something that I thought was really interesting, which is that these people think that they are judging Jesus, but Jesus, they're actually the ones who are being judged by the ultimate judge and what they do with him. They are condemning him, but ultimately they're condemning themselves. Like Judas sold Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver, but ultimately he sold himself out. Like he gave up eternity with God for 30 pieces of silver. And then he regretted it and ended up hanging himself. But that was his choice. And it's like, we have Jesus in front of us. What are we doing with him? Who are we saying that he is? That is the most important question of your life. Who do you say that Jesus is? Was he just this nice man that lived 2,000 years ago? Or was he the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world? That is the most important question you're going to have to answer in your lifetime. And I always say it on here. You don't have forever, so better figure it out. And if you have any questions, ask me, okay? So Pilate's confused. He's saying, why? What evil has he done? Like, why are you going to take out this murderer and you want to condemn this innocent man? He is confused. Like, what's wrong with these people? But they're shouting, crucify him, and he doesn't want to start a problem. It says he wishes to satisfy the crowd. So he releases Barabbas, this murderer, and they scourge Jesus. And if you guys have seen The Passion of the Christ, you know it is brutal to watch. Brutal. Like, it's hard to watch. You want to look away, right? But I've seen that movie a couple times now, and I like force myself to watch it because that is the punishment that I deserve for my rebellion against God. And Jesus, who was this totally innocent man who did nothing wrong in his whole life, not only did he do nothing wrong, he went above and beyond to serve people. Even though he is God himself, he took the position of a servant. He washed his disciples' feet, knowing they were going to betray him. He healed people. He loved people. He saves people. And this is what we did to him. If you read articles about there was a medical journal that published like how Jesus died and what he physically went through on that cross. If you read about the details of how they tortured him, like what he actually went through, it's not just like they slapped him around a little bit and whipped him on the back and then hung him up on a cross. Like, it is brutal. I just want to read a little bit because it's important for us to face this. Like, don't bury your head in the sand when it comes to Jesus' suffering, because I think it's so important for us to realize what we deserve. Like, I deserved this horrible punishment because of my sin against the Lord. So this is about the scourging. The goal of the scourging was to weaken the victim to a state just short of collapse and death. As the Roman soldiers repeatedly struck the victim's back with full force, the iron balls would cause deep contusions, and the leather thongs and sheep bones would cut into the skin and subcutaneous tissues. Lacerations would tear into the underlying skeletal muscles and produce quivering ribbons of bleeding flesh. Pain and blood loss generally set the stage for circulatory shock. So now he has these horrible wounds, like all of his like muscular tissues exposed on his back. And then they make him, oh, hold on, I'm jumping ahead. So they scourge him, and now we get to verse 16. It's so horrible. Humans. Okay, so 16 to 21. And the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole battalion. And they clothed him in a purple cloth, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were striking his head with a reed, and spitting on him, and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. We see here like the most disgusting parts of humanity and like the evil that is within the human heart. It says there was a whole battalion. There was like a ton of these soldiers, and they were mocking him. They put on this purple cloak, which is supposed to be like a sign of royalty, and they made a crown of thorns, and I read that the thorns were like 3 inches long, and they beat it onto this man's head. And then they start mocking him. They're striking his head with a reed, and he's got this crown of thorns digging into his skull, into his skin. They're spitting on him. And I wrote down in my Bible, not in Mark, but in a different gospel, God came to man and we spit in his face. Like, it honestly makes me want to cry. Like how patient is he with us that we do things like that to him, and he still forgives us. So we see here like abuse, violence, they're mocking him. Like this is the worst of humanity, right? It's just disgusting. So then we get to verse 21. This whole chapter is just so emotional. It's awful, but it makes me appreciate him even more. All right, so verse 21. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them, to decide what each should take. And it was the 3rd hour when they crucified him. And the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. So I know we see usually like pictures of Jesus carrying the cross. He's carrying the whole thing. But what's more likely is that the top down part was already at the spot where he was going to be crucified, and he was carrying the crossbeam. And I read that the entire cross weighed about 300 pounds, and the crossbeam that Jesus was carrying most likely was between 75 and 100 pounds. And this is after he has been like tortured and beaten, and this crown of thorns has been pushed into his skull, and he's like on the verge of shock, and he can probably feel everything. Like carrying a cross when you've been beaten that badly, it's just, they were awful, right? So they compel this man, Simon of Cyrene, and Cyrene is in North Africa. So he was probably in Jerusalem as like a pilgrimage for Passover. And it says here he's the father of Alexander and Rufus, which tells us that Mark, writing this gospel, is assuming that people who are reading it at the time that he wrote it know who these people are. And let's remember, because we talked about this in the beginning, the Gospel of Mark that we're reading was written in 70 AD, which is 30-something years after these events have happened. So the things that Mark is writing, like he's talking about Alexander and Rufus, a lot of these people were still around and they could substantiate what he was saying. So that's just another piece of evidence that tells us that these things actually happened. So they take him to Golgotha, which means place of a skull. They offer him wine mixed with myrrh, but he doesn't take it. That drink might have like dulled his senses, and he didn't take it. And they crucified him. They put those spike nails through his wrists, because if they had put them in his hands, it would have torn right through. So he had 2 spike nails right through his wrists and 1 through his feet. And he's... I'm going to link an article because I think it's important for us to know exactly like what he endured. If you are not afraid to read that kind of thing. So he's on the cross now. I'm going to read you this part of like what this felt like for him, because again, it's important for us to understand what he went through. The posture of crucifixion made it painful to simply breathe. The weight of the body pulling down on the arms and shoulders made it feel like you could breathe in but not out. The lack of oxygen led to severe muscle cramps, which made it even harder to breathe. To get a good breath, one had to push against the feet and flex the elbows, pulling from the shoulders. Putting the weight of the body on the nail-pierced feet produced searing pain. Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Putting the weight of the body on the nail-pierced feet produced searing pain, and flexing the elbows twisted the hands hanging on the nails. Lifting the body for a breath also scraped the open wounds on the back against the rough wooden post. Each effort to get a proper breath was agonizing, exhausting, and led to a quicker death. And there's more, but that's just a little bit of what he was going through for hours. For you and for me. So in verse 23, it says, they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them. This was prophesied in the book of Psalms, and I want to look at it because you guys know I love showing the connections between the Old and New Testament, because they really do go hand in hand. So this is Psalm 22:18. It says, they divided my garments among themselves, and they cast lots for my clothing. And then they put this plaque on the cross that says, the King of the Jews, like mocking him. Like, here's your king, Jews. Like, this is what's happening to him. And then they crucified him with 2 robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And I want to read Luke's account of this because Mark kind of glazes over that part, but Luke gives us more detail, and this is also important and kind of a mirror of us and what was happening here. Like, these 2 people are an image of the choice that we have to make about Jesus as well. So this is Luke 23, verses 39 to 43. So Jesus is in between these 2 criminals. One is crucified on his left and one on his right. So Luke tells us, then one of the criminals hanging there began to yell insults at him. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. So he's mocking him. But the other one answered, rebuking him, don't you even fear God since you are undergoing the same punishment? We are punished justly because we're getting back what we deserve for the things we did, but this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." These men are up there, and one of them looks at Jesus and decides to mock him. He doesn't take him seriously. He doesn't fear God. And the other one has a fear of the Lord and understands. He sees who Jesus is, and he asks him to remember him when he goes into his kingdom. And Jesus tells that man, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Like, you're coming with me. You're mine. And that's the choice we have to make. Are we going to reject him, or are we going to accept him and accept the gift of salvation? Those two robbers are such a good picture of the choice that we have. And Jesus offers forgiveness to the one that humbly comes to him. The Bible says that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That is something that's available to every single one of us. One of these robbers rejected Christ, and one of them accepted him. So people are walking by the cross and mocking Jesus and saying, "You said you'd rebuild the temple in 3 days. Just come down off that cross if you are who you say you are." So they're mocking him, and it's like, how can you look at somebody going through something like that and make fun of them? Like, I don't understand. I know that the sin that is like within those people is also in me, and I don't know what I would have done back then. You never know. It just sounds really bad, right? So they're mocking him, but he knows he could have come down off that cross. He could do anything he wants. He's God, but he knows what needs to be done, and he's doing it for these sinners. Did I read verse 32? It says, "Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe. Those who were crucified with him also reviled him." All right, so now verse 33. "And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, 'Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani,' which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "Behold, he's calling Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." There were also women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James the younger and of Joseph and Salome. When he was in Galilee, they followed him and ministered to him, and there were also many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. All right, so we only have one little chunk left at the end there, but let's talk about this part. So something that's really cool is that if you go to NASA's website, you can see a list of all the eclipses that have happened over history. Like, they can trace things back, right? And you can see one there where it says crucifixion of Jesus, because it says here there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. So there was 3 hours of darkness, which was an eclipse. There was also an earthquake. There's a Roman historian named Phlegon, and he wrote, "In the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad, there was an extraordinary eclipse of the sun. At the 6th hour, the day turned into dark night so that the stars in heaven were seen, and there was an earthquake." So this Roman historian wrote about this happening, that the earth shook and there was an eclipse. And Jesus says here when he dies, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Because here we see when Jesus prayed, "Father, if it is your will, let this cup pass from me." He didn't want to endure this thing. What is that thing? He and the Father, who had this loving relationship from eternity past, from forever, he was now feeling the full wrath of God the Father that every single human being on earth deserves. He had that wrath upon himself. And now he was experiencing this separation that he had never experienced from the Father. Jesus didn't sin at all. And we read in 2 Corinthians 5:21, it says, "God made him who knew no sin," so Christ, "to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him." So Jesus in this moment is experiencing the full wrath of God that we deserve as sinners, so that we can be reunited with the Father. He's doing it on our behalf. So now they think he's calling for Elijah, but that is not what he's saying. People, come on. And then he utters a loud cry and breathes his last. And in John 19:30, John records Jesus saying this word that in Greek is teteleste, which literally means paid in full. Like we translate it as it is finished. But it's like the debt is paid. It is done. The debt that humanity owes God is paid in full. What would it be like if you were in court and you were guilty for something and the judge comes in and he says, "Did you do this?" And you know that you did that thing. And he says, I'm going to take on this punishment. I'm going to pay this debt in full. That's what God does. He pays our debt in full. And then it says the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. God tore that curtain. He was the one that had to tear it. Like we couldn't do it from the bottom up. Human beings can't bridge that gap between us and God. God had to tear that curtain. That curtain represents this separation from God. Like only the priest was allowed to have access to God back then. Like you had to sacrifice animals and do all these things. There was a separation between us. But once that temple curtain was torn, that is symbolizing that we now have access to God. You don't have to go through another sinful human being to have access to God. We can access him directly because of Christ. If you have Christ living in you, you have access to the Father. You have the Holy Spirit living within you. We now have access to God. Just like he meant for it in the beginning, before we sinned and ruined everything, he meant for us to be in relationship with him. We now have that ability again to have access to the Father. So now verse 42 says, "And when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God, took courage and went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate was surprised to hear that he should have already died. And summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he was already dead. And when he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the corpse to Joseph. And Joseph bought a linen shroud, and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud and laid him in a tomb that had been cut out of the rock. And he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph saw where he was laid." So this Joseph of Arimathea goes to Pilate and asks for Jesus' body. They don't want bodies up on these crosses during Passover. It's like, that's a no-go. They don't want that there. Passover is like the sacred time. They do not want the bodies up there. So he asked for the body, and Pilate is surprised that Jesus died so fast. It usually took longer for somebody to die, but Jesus was already dead. And the centurion verified that Jesus was dead. In another gospel account, they pierce Jesus' side and water and blood come out, and they verify that he was dead. So we know that Jesus was dead. Joseph buys a linen shroud, takes Jesus off the cross, puts this linen shroud around Jesus, and puts him in a tomb, and they roll a stone against the tomb. And the women see all of this happening. They know where Jesus is. One thing about the shroud, I watched a video the other day because I've heard of the Shroud of Turin before, but I watched this video the other day and it was fascinating on the Shroud of Turin. And the more we progress in science, the more they can study it. If you've never heard of the Shroud of Turin, it is a shroud, basically this piece of linen that was wrapped around someone who had died. Except the Shroud of Turin, they believe, some people believe, and based on the evidence I've heard, it sounds like it's quite possible that this shroud is the shroud we're reading about here, the one that was wrapped around Jesus. If you're watching this on YouTube, or I'm going to link that video so that you guys can watch it. It's by this doctor, and it's so interesting, the evidence that they've found. I don't want to go into detail because I'm going to mess up the science of it, but it's really interesting. If you guys have like an hour and you want to learn a little bit more about the Shroud of Turin, because it's just another piece of evidence that proves that all of this is true. Like, people will say, I don't believe in Jesus, there's not enough evidence. There is so much evidence, okay? At this point, it's like, if you don't believe in Jesus, that's your own pride. There's so much evidence. But if you guys are interested in that video, I'll link it below. It's really, really fascinating. And it's kind of hard to say that it's not the shroud that Jesus was wrapped in. It's so, so cool. And how that image was made on the shroud, it's crazy. Anyway, God is amazing, and he reveals things to us over time. Like, we didn't have the technology to understand every bit of the shroud when they first found it, but now as more science is available to us and more scientific methods, we're able to study it deeper and just piece together more pieces of this puzzle that God has given us. It's so cool. So we have one chapter left, and this is the good news, the resurrection. Okay, but we'll get into that in our next Mark episode. So I hope you guys enjoy this. Please leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought. And I'll be back before Easter because we have to finish this before Easter. Because the resurrection, that's the good news. That's Easter. Christ is risen. Okay, that's all. Stay blessed. Bye.